At exactly 3 in the morning, the sharp sound of knocking jolted me awake. My small flat on the outskirts of Leeds was usually quiet at night. Only the distant hum of passing cars on the motorway or the occasional barking of a dog ever broke the silence. But this knocking, it was different. It was insistent, hurried, as if someone desperately needed to be let in. I rubbed my eyes, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. My bedside clock glowed in the dark. 3:02 a.m. The knocking came again, louder this time, echoing through the narrow hallway that led to my front door. I hesitated. Who could possibly be at my door at this hour? My mind raced through possibilities. A neighbor in trouble? A prank? Or something far worse? The atmosphere in my flat felt heavy, the kind of tension that presses against your chest and makes every sound sharper. Slowly, I slipped out of bed, the wooden floor creaking beneath my bare feet. I didn't dare turn on the lights. I didn't want whoever was outside to know I was awake. Instead, I let the dim glow of the street lamp filter through the thin curtains, casting faint shadows across the room. Another knock, quicker this time, almost frantic. I swallowed hard and whispered to myself, "All right, steady." When I reached the door, I placed my hand on the cold metal handle but stopped short of turning it. Instead, I pressed my ear against the wood. I could hear faint breathing on the other side. My heart began to pound. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice unsteady. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a man's voice, low, raspy, almost pleading, broke the stillness. "Please, open the door. I need help." The accent was distinctly local Yorkshire, but something about the tone unsettled me. It didn't sound like a simple request. It sounded desperate and dangerous. I hesitated again, my fingers trembling on the handle. Through the tiny peephole, I could make out a tall figure standing on the porch, his face obscured by the shadows of the hood he wore. The street lamp behind him cast his silhouette in sharp relief. He stood unnervingly still, except for the way his shoulders rose and fell as if he were catching his breath. The neighborhood was quiet. No other lights came on, no sign that anyone else had heard the knocking. It was just me, alone, in the middle of the night with a stranger at my door. I thought of my neighbor, Mrs. Harris, an elderly widow who lived 2 doors down. She had once warned me, over tea, never to trust late-night visitors. "If it's trouble, they'll always come when you're least prepared," she had said, her eyes narrowing knowingly. At that moment, her words echoed in my mind like a warning. Still, curiosity gnawed at me. What if he truly needed help? What if someone was hurt, waiting in the cold? I shifted uneasily, torn between compassion and fear. My flat felt smaller by the second, the silence pressing in as the man outside took a step closer to the door. And then, in the stillness of the night, he whispered again, this time more urgent, more chilling. "Please don't make me wait." The words clung to the silence like frost on glass. "Please don't make me wait." I froze, my breath caught halfway in my chest. For the first time, I became aware of how loud my heartbeat was in the quiet of the flat. Every thump seemed to echo off the walls, as if the stranger outside could hear it too. My hand was still on the door handle, cold against my palm, but I dared not move it any further. The hallway smelled faintly of damp wood, the old floorboards beneath me groaning at every tiny shift of my weight. My mind was torn, swinging wildly between the instinct to shut myself in my bedroom and compulsion to open the door to this shadowed figure. I wanted to believe it could be something simple, an accident, a neighbor locked out, a passerby needing help. But the way he whispered, the insistence, the unnatural stillness, none of it felt right. "Who are you?" I asked again, louder this time. The man didn't answer at once. I heard him shift, the soft scrape of shoes on stone. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "It doesn't matter who I am. Please, I just need to come inside. Only for a moment. Only for a moment. The phrasing made my skin crawl. I leaned closer to the peephole, straining to see. The hood of his jacket was drawn tightly over his head, hiding his face in shadow. His posture was strange, rigid, shoulders hunched, as though he were holding something under his coat. I couldn't tell if it was just the folds of fabric or something more. The air felt colder suddenly. Perhaps it was only my imagination, but the draft along the floor seemed sharper, like winter had seeped into the hallway. My mind flicked back to earlier that evening. I had returned from work just after 9, exhausted from a long day at the office in the city center. I had eaten leftovers, scrolled idly through my phone, and gone to bed earlier than usual. The thought that, only hours later, I would be standing in my hallway with a stranger whispering through my door at 3 in the morning was surreal. Leeds at night had always felt safe to me. Now, my quiet little flat felt like a trap. The knocking resumed, lighter this time but quicker, as though his patience was wearing thin. Tap, 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 tap. My chest tightened with each sound. I backed away from the door, step by step, until my shoulders touched the wall of the hallway. For a second, I thought perhaps he would give up if I stayed quiet. Maybe he'd leave, realizing I wasn't going to open. But then his voice returned softer, almost sing-song in tone. I know you're awake. I heard you. Just let me in. The words cut through me. How had he heard me? I had spoken, yes, but quietly, with the door between us. Did that mean he'd been listening closely, ear pressed to the wood? Waiting? Panic prickled across my skin. I wanted to run back to my bedroom, lock the door, and call the police. My phone was on the nightstand, just a few steps away. But even as I thought of it, I knew I'd have to pass the hallway window, and he might see the glow of the screen. Something about him, his persistence, his eerie calmness, made me afraid of being seen. Another sound reached me, one that nearly stopped my breath entirely. The faint rattle of the doorknob. He was trying it, slowly, carefully, as though testing how much give the lock had. The metallic click reverberated in the stillness, each tiny movement like thunder in my ears. Stop that. I snapped, my voice cracking. The knob stilled. Silence. And then a laugh. Quiet, breathless, but unmistakably a laugh. My stomach churned. There was nothing humorous in this situation. Yet here he was, standing outside my flat in the early hours of the morning, laughing under his breath. I couldn't tell if it was out of amusement or anticipation. I retreated further into the flat, my legs shaking beneath me. My bare feet pressed against the cold wood, and I tried to steady my breathing, forcing air into my lungs in shallow bursts. In that moment, every sound in the building felt amplified. A pipe creaked somewhere in the walls. A neighbor upstairs shifted in bed, the faint thud of footsteps echoing through the ceiling. But none of them knew what was happening just beyond my door. None of them could hear the man outside, still waiting, still whispering. I thought of calling out, shouting loudly enough to wake the neighbors, but the words lodged in my throat. If I screamed, would he try harder to break in, or would it scare him off? Please, he said again, almost tender now. You don't understand. I just need to come in. You'll see everything will be all right. The way he said it, calm and certain, made it sound like a promise. Or a threat. The minutes dragged by like hours. The red digits on my clock glowed faintly through the doorway of my bedroom. 3:19. Time felt distorted. Had it really only been 17 minutes since I first heard the knock? It felt like an eternity, every second heavy with the weight of decision. I finally made a choice. Slowly, carefully, I began to back down the hall toward my bedroom, never turning my eyes from the door. My plan was simple. Lock the bedroom door, grab my phone, and call the police. Surely they'd arrive quickly enough. Surely this would end. But just as I reached the threshold of my room, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a key sliding into the lock. My blood turned cold. He had a key. The knob turned once more, smoother this time, as though it had finally found the right fit. A metallic click echoed in the darkness as the deadbolt released. I stood frozen in the doorway of my bedroom, heart hammering, as the front door began to creak open inch by inch. The hinges groaned softly, like an old wooden coffin being pried open. And then, in the faint light of the street lamp, I saw his silhouette move into the hallway. The figure stepped inside, and the sound of the door shutting behind him seemed to swallow all other noises. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed myself against the doorframe of my bedroom, body rigid, unsure whether to run or to scream. The man moved slowly, deliberately, as though he knew the layout of my flat without ever having been there before. His hood remained drawn low over his head, concealing his face. The glow from the street lamp outside stretched his shadow long across the hallway floor, bending unnaturally as it crept closer. "You shouldn't have left the door unlocked," he said softly. His voice carried that same rasping tone, like gravel being dragged across concrete. My lips parted, but no words came out. I hadn't unlocked the door. He had a key. How? My landlord? A neighbor? Or had the previous tenant given him one? My mind tumbled through questions, but none of them mattered in that moment. All that mattered was that he was inside. "What do you want?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice trembling. He tilted his head slowly, as though considering the question. Then he chuckled faintly, the sound low and unsettling. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you need to understand." I felt my stomach twist. His words didn't make sense, but there was something calculated in them, as if he had rehearsed this moment, planned it carefully. The clock in my bedroom ticked audibly in the silence. 3:27. I could hear every second dragging by, a cruel reminder that time was moving forward even as my body remained frozen. I glanced toward my nightstand, where my phone lay just a few feet away. If I could get to it, if I could dial emergency services before he noticed. But he was blocking the hallway, his presence filling the narrow space. He stepped further in, his shoes muffled against the wooden floor. His hand reached into the pocket of his jacket, and for a terrifying instant, I thought he was going to pull out a weapon. My chest tightened, my pulse thundering in my ears. But instead, he withdrew a small object, something metallic that glinted faintly in the dim light. It was another key. He dangled it lightly between his fingers, letting it swing back and forth. The sound of it clinking against the metal ring was sharp, deliberate. "This place," he murmured, "has too many doors." I didn't understand what he meant, but the way he said it made my skin crawl. Summoning what little courage I had, I took a small step back into my bedroom. Try and put distance between us. "You need to leave. Right now. I'll call the police." The man tilted his head again, and though I couldn't see his face, I could feel the weight of his gaze. "Call them, then. They won't get here in time." My knees went weak. His certainty was chilling. He spoke as though he had all the time in the world, as if he knew exactly how this would unfold. The street outside was still silent. No footsteps, no cars passing. It felt as if the entire world had gone to sleep and left me alone with him. I tried to think of a plan, anything that might get me out of this. My flat wasn't big, just a bedroom, a small living room, kitchen, and bathroom. The only exit was the front door, now blocked by him. The window in my bedroom opened out to the side street, but it was a drop from the second floor. I didn't know if I could make it. He stepped closer. The floor creaked under his weight, each sound punctuating the distance shrinking between us. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "It's worse if you're afraid." That was when I noticed his hands. One still held the key, but the other, shaking slightly, was clutching the inside of his coat. Something bulged beneath the fabric. hidden but unmistakable. My heart lurched. I forced myself to speak, to break the suffocating silence. "Why are you here?" He stopped, only a few feet away now. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't answer. Then, in a voice so low I had to strain to hear it, he said, "Because you opened the door." My breath hitched. My mind reeled. That wasn't true. I hadn't opened it. He had used a key. But in his twisted logic, it seemed I had given him permission by not stopping him sooner. The clock ticked again. 3:34. I considered running past him, forcing my way to the front door. But even as the thought crossed my mind, he seemed to sense it. He shifted slightly, his body turning just enough to block the hallway more firmly. Every escape route felt cut off. The walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with tension. Then something unexpected happened. He lifted his hand slowly, almost gently, and pushed back the hood of his jacket. His face was pale, gaunt, with deep shadows under his eyes. His hair was unkempt, his lips chapped. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His expression was not one of anger, but something far more unsettling, calm. "You don't recognize me, do you?" he asked. I shook my head, my throat too tight to form words. He smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "That's all right. You will." A shiver ran down my spine. I searched his features desperately, trying to place him. A stranger, surely, but there was a flicker of something familiar in his eyes. Had I seen him on the bus? Passing in the street? Or was my terrified mind simply playing tricks on me? He took another step forward, and I instinctively stepped back into my room. The dim light fell across my nightstand now, illuminating the phone that could be my salvation. His eyes flicked toward it, then back to me. He knew what I was thinking. "I wouldn't," he said softly. The room felt colder. My body trembled with the weight of fear, but I stood my ground. My hand twitched toward the nightstand, though I dared not make a move just yet. He sighed as though disappointed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The way he spoke, the calmness, the certainty, was almost worse than if he had been shouting. It was the voice of someone who believed he was in complete control. The clock ticked again. 3:41. Time was dragging, stretching endlessly, every second a battle against panic. He stepped fully into my bedroom now, his presence filling the small space. The key in his hand swung lightly, catching the faint light once more. He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the window. "Too high to jump," he muttered, almost to himself. Then his eyes returned to me. "But you thought about it, didn't you?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. How could he know? Was he guessing? Or could he truly read my thoughts? The silence stretched unbearable. The world outside remained still, oblivious. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I was completely alone with him, and no one knew. His hand moved again, deeper into his coat. I tensed, every muscle bracing. Whatever was hidden there, I was about to see it. And then, just as he drew it out, a sound broke the silence. A distant thud from the flat above, followed by muffled footsteps. A neighbor had gotten up, perhaps to use the bathroom, perhaps woken by the creak of the building. The man froze, his eyes flicking upward, his body tense, his expression shifting for the first time. The sound passed, fading back into silence. He looked back at me, his lips curling into a thin smile. "Lucky," he whispered. I stood frozen, my chest heaving with shallow breaths. The object in his hand, half hidden in the shadows, began to glint. The object in his hand caught the faint glow of the streetlight once again. For a split second, my mind filled in every terrifying possibility. A knife, a gun, something sharp and cold that could end this night in a way I didn't even want to imagine. My lungs tightened, and I found myself holding my breath as though my body had gone rigid of its own accord. But when he finally let it slip into view, the reality was both stranger and no less unsettling. It wasn't a weapon. It was a small, battered silver locket on a chain. Its surface was scratched and tarnished, the kind of jewelry that had been carried for years, maybe decades. He held it carefully, almost reverently, like it was the most important thing in the world. "Do you see this?" he asked, his voice steady, almost calm. I didn't answer. My eyes flicked from the locket to his pale face. His gaze was fixed on me with a kind of unshakable intensity, as though my reaction to this object would determine everything that followed. "This belongs to you," he whispered. I shook my head quickly. "No, I've never seen it before. You've made a mistake." The man tilted his head, studying me in silence for a moment before his lips curled into the faintest smile. "Not a mistake. Never a mistake. It's yours and you've forgotten." The way he said it, so certain, so final, sent a shiver racing through me. I wanted to insist again, to shout that I had no idea what he was talking about, but something in his expression stopped me. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. Belief. The clock on my nightstand ticked loudly in the silence. 3:47. Time was dragging, each minute heavy with dread. I forced myself to move slightly, edging toward the nightstand where my phone still sat. The man's eyes darted toward my hand, then back to my face. He didn't move to stop me yet, but the unspoken warning in his gaze was enough. "I know you're afraid," he murmured, stepping closer, the locket still dangling from his hand. "But you don't need to be, not once you remember." His words burrowed into my mind like thorns. What was he talking about? Remember what? I searched my memory frantically, tried to recall any connection to him, to the locket, to this night. But there was nothing. He was a stranger. He had to be. The building creaked softly, as old buildings do in the dead of night. Somewhere outside, a car passed in the distance, its headlights sweeping briefly across the curtains before vanishing again. For a moment, I wished desperately that whoever was driving had glanced up and seen the faint silhouette of me standing here, trapped in my own bedroom with a stranger who had a key. The man lifted the locket higher, opening it with a faint click. Inside, I could see a tiny faded photograph. It was difficult to make out in the dim light, but the shape of a woman's face was there, half smiling, eyes frozen in time. He turned it toward me, holding it so close I could no longer avoid looking. "Look," he said firmly. I hesitated, then let my eyes focus on the image. My stomach lurched. The woman in the photograph looked uncannily like me. Not exactly. Her hair was styled differently. Her clothes were from another decade, and her eyes held a certain expression I couldn't quite replicate. But the resemblance was undeniable. The same cheekbones, the same curve of the lips, the same tilt of the head. My knees weakened, and I gripped the edge of the nightstand to steady myself. "That's not me," I whispered, though even in my own ears the words sounded hollow. "She was your mother," the man said. His tone softened, almost tender, as if this revelation was meant to comfort me. "And you've been running from the truth." I stared at him, my mouth dry, my voice caught somewhere between disbelief and horror. "My mother died years ago, and I've never seen that locket before in my life. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong." The man's expression didn't change. His eyes were locked on mine, unblinking. "No, you've forgotten. They made you forget. But I remember." The silence in the room grew heavier. The air felt colder, the walls pressing in closer. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to break free, to escape this man who seemed to know things he shouldn't. I shifted again, edging my fingers toward the phone. This time, I managed to touch it just enough to feel the cool surface against my skin. My heart pounded as I began to slide it slowly toward me. But before I could close my hand around it, his voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. Don't. I froze. He took another step forward, and now he was only a foot away. I could see the faint stubble on his chin, the bloodshot veins in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he clutched the locket. He smelled faintly of damp air and cigarette smoke, the kind that clings to someone who's been outside for too long. "You don't need the police," he said, softer again now. "They won't understand. They'll just take me away before I can explain, and then you'll never know." My voice finally broke through the fear choking me. "Know what?" He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Why I've been watching you." The room seemed to tilt beneath me. My grip tightened on the nightstand, my other hand hovering over the phone, torn between snatching it and holding still. "You've seen me," he continued, "in the crowd, on the bus, walking past your street. You didn't notice. Not really. But I was there, making sure you were safe, waiting for the right time." My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat, the thought that he had been watching me, silently weaving himself into the background of my life, was almost worse than his presence here now. How long had he been doing it? Weeks? Months? The clock ticked again. 3:54. "I had to come tonight," he said, his voice dropping lower, almost a whisper, "because they know. They're coming, and you need to be ready." "They..." My voice cracked, trembling. "Who's coming?" He leaned closer, so close I could feel the warmth of his breath against my face. His eyes burned with a strange mix of fear and conviction, the ones who made you forget. A chill ran through me so deep I thought my body might collapse. His words didn't make sense, not in any rational way, but the certainty with which he spoke made them lodge in my mind like splinters. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The flat was silent except the clock, ticking mercilessly toward the next minute. My body screamed to act, to do something, grab the phone, run to the window, shout for help, but my limbs felt locked in place. And then, suddenly, the locket in his hand snapped shut with a sharp click. He slipped it back into his coat and straightened his posture, as though some decision had been made. "It's almost time," he murmured. He turned slightly, his eyes flicking once more toward the window. His expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw something crack in his calm exterior. His face tightened, his jaw clenched. "They're already here." I followed his gaze, my breath catching in my throat. The faint glow of headlights swept across the curtains again, but this time, the car didn't pass. The light remained unmoving, casting long shadows into the room. Someone had stopped outside. The man stiffened, his hands clenching at his sides. The calmness in him was gone now, replaced by a tension that made the air feel electric. He looked back at me, his voice urgent. "You have to trust me." I stared at him, my body trembling, every nerve alight with panic. The headlights outside burned brighter, steady, waiting. And in that moment, caught between the stranger in my room and the unknown outside my window, I realized something terrifying. No matter what I chose, there was no safe way out. The clock struck 3:59. The doorknob rattled again. This time it wasn't him. The rattling at the door grew sharper, more insistent, as though whoever was outside knew there wasn't much time left. The man in my bedroom turned his head quickly, his pale face caught in the dim light. His expression was no longer calm, no longer composed. It was fear. "They found us," he whispered. I stepped back, my hands trembling, heart slamming in my chest. I didn't know who they were or if he was simply raving in madness, but the headlights outside, the shadow beneath the door, the sound of voices low and muffled, it was all real. "Stay away from me," I said, my voice cracking. My fingers closed tightly around my phone now, ready to dial, ready to scream if I had to. He looked at me once more, his eyes almost pleading. "You'll remember soon. Just don't open that door." And then, before I could speak, before I could even breathe, he darted out of my room and down the narrow hallway. The sound of his footsteps on the wooden floorboards echoed in the silence, then stopped abruptly near the front door. The knocking grew louder. I stood frozen in my bedroom, staring at the darkened hallway, listening. There was a scrape of metal against metal, another lock turning. Then the door opened, a rush of cold night air spilling into the flat. I heard voices, low, urgent, too muffled to make out the words. A shuffle of movement, heavy footsteps crossing the threshold, then silence. When I finally forced myself into the hallway, the front door stood wide open, the night spilling in. The man was gone. Outside, the car headlights blinked once, then vanished into the darkness as the engine roared to life. The street was empty. I was alone. The clock in my room struck 4, and standing there, shivering in the cold air of the open doorway, I realized I would never know if the real danger had just left my flat, or it was still waiting for me, somewhere in the dark.